Hi, this is Robin, and this video is about finding inspiration in the styles of black and white fine art photo masters. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I think most of us who are passionate about art have favorite artists whose styles we admire. And their work can be a model for our own art, either consciously or subconsciously. And that is the focus of this video workshop. So what I've done is I've selected 3 black and white fine art photographers whose photo styles I admire. They include Herbert List, Lillian Bassman, and Pentti Sammallahti. The first 2 are from the past. The third is a contemporary photographer. And in this workshop, what I'll do is I'll analyze a small cross-section of works by each artist to identify the essence of their style. And by style, I mean their visual look. So how they compose images, tonal balance and intensity, subject matter, mood, things like that. And then after I kind of get the essence of, what their style seems to reflect, then I'll demonstrate using Photoshop tools how to process an image in ways that are inspired by that style. Now, again, you may not have the same favorite artists, but I think the process of going through the analysis, seeing what to look at, how to look at images, and then even probably a lot of the same tools that I'm going to use, if you're not oriented towards low-key, in other words, darker images like I am, you could use the same tools and just push them in the lighter, brighter direction. So I think this has relevance even to people who don't have those 3 artists as their favorite artists that they'd like to try to emulate or be inspired by. And I keep hammering the word inspire because the point is not to slavishly copy them. You don't want to appropriate artists' looks like what Sherry Levine did with Walker Evans, Edward Weston, and others, which is just directly copy their work. Rather, the goal is to steal like an artist, like I have here on the screen. There's a book called Steal Like an Artist, and this is the author right here. And in that book, he has this chart that I have borrowed to share here about what represents good theft, in other words, being inspired by or stealing like an artist versus bad theft. And I don't need to read you all of these things. You can read them yourselves. But the point is you don't want to plagiarize and you want your own unique style. So that's what we're going to try to cover in this, is how to take inspiration, but then to process in ways that you can achieve your own unique looks. So that's the setup for what I'm going to be covering. Now, just quickly, so you know some details about access to information that you have here on the YouTube website, I will post the start times for each topic. So I'll break down the analysis and the demo for each artist. So if you go through the analysis once and decide, okay, these aren't, artists I want to try to emulate, and you want to just hop to the demos and the types of tools that you want to use, then I'll have broken that down so you can find where the demos are more easily in the description below the video. I will also try to include links to the stock images that I use for the demos. And then finally, with regard to subscription to my channel, if you've already subscribed from prior videos of mine, you're all set. You only have to subscribe once. If you are new to the channel, click the free subscribe button and the black bell icon below the video if you would like to get a single alert from YouTube when I release new free Photoshop educational content each month. So let me just pause for a moment here so we can get right into the artist profiles and demos. And I am going to start with Herbert List. So hold on just a moment. I'll be right back. So Herbert List will be the first photographer, black and white fine art photographer, whose work I'm going to cover in terms of looking at the essence of his style and then looking about ways or trying to demonstrate steps that we can follow to try to achieve a similar kind of look without exactly copying him. Now, for each of these three artists that I'm going to cover, I'll give you a very brief bio, then go into what do I see in terms of an analysis of the look of his images, and then after we get the sense of what his style is, then I'll go through the step-by-step demo of using Photoshop to try to emulate that kind of look. So Herbert List was a German photographer. He lived 1903 to 1975, and he fled Nazi Germany in 1936. Now, actually, he began his photo career in Paris, shooting primarily portraits, architecture, and landscapes. And his style can be classified as following something of the classical, in quotes, style of art. So similar in the sense of from the Greco-Roman and Renaissance period of being very realistic in terms of his proportions, his simple compositions, a lot of harmonious elements to his images. And you can see these are not cluttered images. But he also, and this is what attracts me because I like surrealism, he blended in experimental qualities like surrealism into his images. And if you're not familiar with the surrealism and the movement of surrealism, it's very dreamlike, lyrical, fantastical kind of qualities to it. So it's not super realistic. It's as if something you would see in a dream where there's disassociated things that don't normally juxtapose with each other. Okay, so that's a little bit of my very brief bio about Herbert List. So here are just 5 examples of his black and white photography. So let's look at this, and I'll try to describe some of the characteristics, at least that I see. And then this is the kind of process I would suggest if you want to try to be inspired by or emulate other artists, you go through these same kind of thought processes, okay? So when I look at his set of sample images here, what I see is very dark, crushed shadows. So look at this, very dark shadows, as well as very stark, bright white, and some muted grays. Okay, so here's the muted grays. You know, so there's all kind of 3 tiers of darkness, brightness, and sort of muted neutral grays in his images. Now, it's funny because when I look at things like this and images like this, another favorite photographer of mine is Fan Ho. He was a Chinese cinematographer turned photographer, and I see a lot of references to List's type of work in Fan Ho's style. Also, that's F-A-N, and the last name is H-O. So if you want to look up his work, I really love the way he uses shadow and light also. Now, Herbert List was influenced by, in the time he was living, the Bauhaus style. So what that means is there's a lot of austerity to his images. There's very clean lines. You see, not cluttered. Simplicity. You get geometric shapes. There's circles, there's triangles, there's squares, you know, so you have to, if you're trying to emulate his look, think about the ways that you can incorporate those types of things, whether it is a literal circle or a triangle, or whether it's the way that the composition is formed that builds those shapes, those geometric shapes. Now, I believe that, again, just to speak about another artist, Herbert List was influenced by Kandinsky. So you get some, if you look at Kandinsky's work, you probably will see the influences to him on Herbert List's work as well. Now, looking again, just for thinking about what we want to try to achieve in Photoshop here and looking at Herbert's images, he has soft backgrounds, but you can see the details in this background. So it's not so blurred out and so soft, so the depth of field is not so opened up that you're not seeing the details. So we need to think about that when we're processing images if we want to achieve a look similar to his, is soft but still seeing details, okay? Now, the other thing that I see with his is that there is a primary subject emphasized and a secondary subject who is the opposite. So in almost all of his images, one subject is a bright white or dark, and the other is the opposite of that. So if we have a bright white subject, the secondary subject is dark. Bright white subject, secondary subject dark. One object bright, the other dark. this subject is light and bright, this subject is dark. Ditto with here the water or the bowl holding the fish, and the fish is dark. So something to think about if you're trying to get a look similar to him is primary bright or light, secondary subject or element is dark, or vice versa, okay? And then there is also this interplay between realistic and dreamlike or surreal in his images. I mean, so look at this. To me, this screams something like Magritte would paint too, okay? So you just think, you know, this is kind of a fantastical thing, and why are there just sunglasses here? So there's always kind of a little bit of a dreamy, lyrical, super real or fantastical kind of a theme or depiction in his images. Okay, so I am going to close these images that we used for inspiration, because again, we don't want to blindly copy. I just want to get the essence of his look, close it up, and see if we can do something in the same general vein with another stock photo. So I'm just going to close this. And this is the stock photo that I'm going to use to try to emulate or be inspired by the way that Herbert List approached his black and white photography. So let me get this a little bigger so we can see what we're doing here. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, this is a stock image. It is from Pixabay, and I will try to, if I can get access to it, to include the link in case you want to try the steps that I'm going to show in Photoshop for processing this with the same image. But again, feel free to just work with your own images. Okay, so as usual, I suggest that you, here in the layers panel on the right, my layers panel is at the top, properties is at the bottom, toolbar is stocked right. I recommend that you duplicate your background layer so that you don't work with the original. So you can either left click and drag that to the bottom of the layers panel to that box with the plus, which is the add new layer icon, and you get the copy. Or while you're on that background copy, you can do a Control or Command J to jump that up to its own layer. Once you have that duplicate, now I want to convert this to black and white. And for this image, I'm going to use from the layers panel, in this bottom of the layers panel, the circle with the line through it, for the adjustment layers, I am going to use a black and white adjustment layer. So you just click on that circle with the line through it and then click on black and white. And you can see that immediately now that color image has been converted to black and white. And I'm going to, for each of these images that I'm going to show the demos with, I'll show a different black and white conversion method. And I will also, in the description, include a link to an earlier video of mine that talks about different ways to do color to black and white conversions. Okay, so now here in the layers panel, we now have added, you can see a black and white adjustment layer. It's got the thumbnail with the white mask. And in the associated properties, you have all of these different sliders for all of these different colors, and you can either slide them, or you can see the word preset here just come across to where there's the little down arrow. If you want, you can just try using the presets and see what works for you. So I'm just going to click on some of these. So, and again, so what I'm trying to achieve to get his Herbert's look, let me see what this does, is I want to make, because remember I said they are one object, the primary object is white, and then the opposite, the secondary object is black, or vice versa. So I want to make this chair more of the light bright, and I want this secondary figure, woman who, or person who's walking back here in the background, to be dark. So this will be bright, this will be dark, to get that Herbert List look. I want to get a lot more darkness in here, but I want to keep some of the neutral grays to keep his look. I also, per his style, as I analyzed, I want to soften up some of this background, but I want to keep enough details that we see what's going on there. I don't want it to be a total blur. So that's the goal. So we're looking to make this chair in the foreground whiter or brighter and get some of these elements in the back darker. So there's darker. Let's see what these other presets do. I'm going to try infrared. No, that doesn't do that. So that does the opposite. If you wanted your thing to be dark, just keep in mind for starting with something like a red, it's going to go dark. Lighter. All right, maximum white as a preset sort of gets me closer towards where I want to go, but it brightened up a lot of this too, so then I'd have to work with that. So this is better. So this made neutral density preset, made this a lot brighter and closer to where I want it. It did brighten up some of this as well. Let me just see if there's anything else in the presets. Yeah, so I don't think anything else is going to be as good as that. All right, so of the presets, for me, the neutral density got it closer to where I wanted to be. But as I said, we can also manually pull these sliders. So let's just experiment and see what happens if we start pulling those. So because there's red here, I just want to pull this a little bit. Okay, so that's still staying bright. Let's take some of the yellow out of here so we can start darkening up some of this background a little bit. And what I do with these sliders, just so you know if you're not as advanced in Photoshop, is I tend to just do little short hops and then release. I'm working with a mouse, so I will pull it and then release so that I can see what's happening before I go too radical with it. All right, so that's the yellow. I move that to the left. Let me also maybe take some of these greens out of here to see if it will darken it up a little bit. All right, I'll leave that there. Now, if you remember, maybe it's hard to remember, there weren't a lot of, or I don't remember seeing a lot of, being conscious of a lot of cyans, blues, and magentas. So let me just, if you come to the bottom of this properties panel, there's that little icon. If you turn it, it's like toggle, you can see, and I don't see any real, maybe some things in here might be perceived as blue by Photoshop, but it's not really going to do an awful lot. So I can try pushing it and seeing if I see any changes. Same thing with the blue. Yeah, not really. Yeah, okay. So I am going to say that this is good as a starting point for me for this image to get closer to that Herbert List kind of look with a brighter primary subject and a darker secondary subject. A lot of this in the background really pushed to dark and more crushed blacks, and then the neutral grays. Okay, so now that I've gotten this conversion done, I want to create a stamp layer. So essentially, I want to create a new base layer to work from. So bottom of the layers panel, I'm going to come to that box with the plus, which is the add new layer icon, and left click on that to get this empty layer. And I'm going to use a maneuver called the claw, because we have multiple keys all held at the same time. So you're going to press and depress all at the same time. Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option, and E, and release. And then this is what I'll label it as a stamp layer. And essentially what that is it's a merge of everything that's come before it onto a single layer, but without collapsing the layers. Okay. All right, so now the next thing I want to try to do here is soften the background just like Herbert List's style. So I want to, on this active stamp layer that I just created, and you know it's active because there's the blue highlight, I'm going to go to the top of this Photoshop interface to the filter menu, left click on that to expand the menu, and I'm going to come to the neural filters, left click on that, and wait for them to load the neural filters. Okay, and then I'm going to come down to the photography category to depth blur. So the second one in the photography category is depth blur. And I'm going to turn that little switch on. So you can see it's turned off. So I'll just click to the right there and turn it on. And look here, it's processing on your device. So it may process slower or faster depending on your system. Okay, so now, and you can see it's just completely blurred out everything behind here. Now, as I said, I want this to be a primary focus, this chair. So coming over here to the right panel where all the different settings are, where it says focus subject, I am going to left click to activate that. Okay, so that'll keep that in focus. Now, the next thing I want to adjust is the focal range, and this is kind of the moral equivalent of an aperture for depth of field. So you'll see how far up here there's blur, and certainly I would expect there, at least on the same plane of the chair, to be not as much blur adjacent to a sharp image like this, a sharp element. So I want to try to use the quote-unquote aperture or the focal range to push the blur back a little bit more back into the scene. Okay, so I'm going to just click on this handle and start pulling this to the right. And as I said, I will release it from time to time and let it process and see if we're moving the blur area back a little bit and bringing more of the focus area back a little bit into the image. Yeah, you can see these aren't as blurred as they were. Okay, this is getting better for the look I want. And you do it to your own taste. This is definitely not a formula. This is to your own taste, but just my interpretation of what List might have had in terms of the depth of field. Okay, so, you know, again, these are not as sharp as this, but it's definitely not as blurred, so I've kind of pushed the blur more back into the mid-ground in this image. All right, so the next thing I want to do is, again, as I said when we were looking at his images, he has blur in his backgrounds, but it's not as blurry as this. You can see the details more clearly. So using this blur strength slider will help bring back some of the details. So I want it to be less than this 50 because to me that's a little bit on the heavy-handed blur side. Okay, so this is getting more into where I want. So I can see like more of the cross pieces in the windows. I can see a little bit more of the detail in the road. So I think that's pretty good. I think I will just leave it there. If you want a more hazy look to yours for atmosphere and mood, that's what this slider here would adjust. So let me just pull it way over. I'm definitely not going to leave it here so you can see what it does. See, so that's how you could get a haze if you want. But I'm going to just do a little hint of that. All right, that's probably good enough for me. Now, I don't need to, because this is not a color image, I am not going to do anything with the temperature, the tint, or the saturation. And again, because I'm adjusting brightness in different ways, I'm not going to adjust the brightness on mine. If you want to play with the brightness for yours, you certainly can do that. The other thing I typically like to do is add a little hint of grain. So it's set to 0 by default. If you have a little bit of grain, and sometimes it's referred to as noise now with the digital cameras, I find that if I have like a 3 to 4 level of grain or noise, that it helps to see some of the details in the shadows a little bit better. And that's just sort of a generic thing. So I will add just a hint of grain. All right, so now I definitely do not want to, for the purposes of this demo and what I'm trying to achieve here, I do not want to output the depth map only. You can use that in different ways for masking in different contexts. Then the next choice you have is where you want to output. So I am going to click on this little down arrow to see the options. And what I want to do is I want to choose New Layer Masked, because right now, as I said, he usually has two subjects or elements that are counterpoints to each other and playing off of each other. And in my case here for this demo, it's the chair and this figure back here. So I know because she got quite blurred, or that person got quite blurred, I want to bring back a little bit more of the sharpness and the distinctness and the ability to see that there is a secondary subject, even if it's small and in the background. By choosing new layer masked versus just new layer, I can doctor the mask and remove some of the blur on her. So I'm going with new layer masked. And then I'm going to click OK for it to process. Okay, so now we have our depth blur here. So I'm debating whether to I'll call it background blur, just so it's labeled and you know what I'm doing on these. And as I said, see, now we have the mask here on this layer that we can doctor a little bit if we want to do that. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer that I just created, just strictly for insurance purposes, because I don't want to go through all of that again. So I often do that, and then I turn off the eye visibility on one of them. So I'm just going to left click on that thumbnail, drag it down to the box with the plus to duplicate or to copy that, or you could again do the Control or Command J to make a duplicate. I'm going to left click to turn that eye visibility off, and I'm going to work on this layer here. Okay, so that's the duplicate copy. All right, so as I said, I want to bring more attention back to this secondary dark figure in the background. So I'm going to work on the mask and doctor the mask. And you know the mask is active if there's the white frame around it. And I'm going to use the brush tool. So again, your toolbar might be on the left. Mine is docked right because I just find it more convenient to have everything close to each other. Come down the toolbar to the tool that looks like a paintbrush, left click, and you'll see there's black behind it. Then you know the tool is active. And I want to use a very soft brush with black, because on that mask, to do the painting. So with that brush tool active, every one of these tools has its own distinctive options and option bar across the top here. So these are the options that are specific to the brush tool. So first I'm going to come over here to where you see this little, what's an icon of a brush preset or a brush tip, and left click on that little down arrow to expand. And you can either, for doing something like I'm going to do, use a soft brush, but I think I might actually work with the airbrush because it might just work a little bit more gradually. So I'm going to just left click on that, and you see, you know, it's active with the blue around it. I'll click over in here to close that. And then I'm going to leave opacity at 100%, but I am going to reduce flow significantly. So what I will do is there's two ways you can do it, and they both do the exact same thing. So you can either click on this little down arrow to get the slider to pull it down, or you can left click on the word flow and just drag. That's what I typically do. And I'm going to bring this down to like under 10% certainly, so maybe 5 to 6%. Let's see, that might be too little. I want to do it enough. I'll leave it at 5%. So the reason I'm reducing flow is the way flow works in Photoshop, if you're not familiar, is if you have the flow at 100% and you make a stroke, you get the full strength of the stroke. If you reduce the flow, then you can build up strokes gradually because you'll see the actual strokes going on. So if I reduce it, I'm not unilaterally taking away all the blur from this. It's like taking an eraser and it's not really an eraser because you're not taking it away, but if you very lightly would think about it just conceptually as taking away some of this with an eraser, it'll gradually take away some of the blur that we imposed on this image. Okay, so with the mask active over here on the right hand side and the white frame around it, brush tool on soft and very low flow, and black as your foreground color, I'm going to start brushing on that secondary figure or element back here to see if I can paint away some of the blur on here. The green is my highlighter, just so you can see where I am. The white is the brush in the center there. So if I want to make it a little bigger, I will hit the right bracket key. See? Okay, let's paint on her or them. So I'm just, and hopefully you shouldn't see too much coming away too fast. That's why it's on low flow. I just want somebody to be conscious that that secondary figure is back there. I don't want them to be a super sharp-edged. Okay, you can see how it's bringing it back, and I don't want to do too much because it wouldn't be right relative to the. And if you want to reverse it and bring back some, you can click on this little double-headed arrow or click the X key to reverse it and make white the foreground. And if you want to, if the edges got too distinct, if you're doing something similar, then you can use some white on it to bring it back. Okay. All right, so I'm going to say that's good enough for demo purposes because you won't be mostly working with this image anyway, but I think there's a better sense now that there's something bright here, there's something dark here, and I'm not going to spend the time for the demo, but just so you know my thought processes of something you can think about for your images too, I would probably select this wall behind her and brighten it up a little bit so that she would stand out more against it. There'd be more contrast, and then we'd know there's the bright and the dark subject, but I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is try to crush these blacks some more. So as I said, he had really dark blacks, and right now they're just a little bit on the muddy side. So now I am going to try to bring those to a darker kind of a thing. So I think what I'll do, I'm trying to think of the best way to do, bottom of the layers panel to the add new adjustment layer icon, which is that circle with the line through it. I think I will use curves because we can have more control with the curves. So I want to, all right, so we've got the new curves adjustment layer added here in the layers panel. In the associated properties panel, we have the curve for the curves adjustment layer. And as you probably know, it runs from on this x-axis from black to white, and on the y from black to white there. So we can pull the curve in the direction of whether we want something darker or lighter. So for mine, I am going to, first of all, maybe lift this just a little bit on the blacks. And then I'm going to pull it to the right to make the blacks darker. And I'm watching the image. Again, this isn't a formulaic kind of thing. I'm just trying to look for my own taste. Maybe that's too much lifting. Let's see here. I'll leave that there. Okay, so by pulling that handle that started in the lower corner of the curve, which is the blacks, black, midtone, white, I have darkened the blacks. You can see they're more intense than they were, okay? So this is giving me more of the kind of look that I want for Herbert List. And we've got these neutral grays here, and the dark blacks, and the primary opposites of the primary and secondary subjects. So I'm feeling pretty good without exactly copying him, that we're getting his kind of a look. All right, so now with that done, let me add another stamp layer, because I think what I want to do is, because of the brightness up here, it tends to draw the viewer's attention up and out of the image. I want the attention primarily down in here. So I am going to add the stamp layer, bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon right there, the box with the plus, get the empty layer, and do the stamp tools claw maneuver. So again, Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option, and E. And we've got this stamp layer again. So now what I want to do is add a little bit of a vignette to this at the top to push the viewer's eyes down more into the image. So to create that, I'm going to come to the toolbar, use the lasso tool. It looks like a little lasso tool, so I've left clicked on it, and be sure you get the black behind it to know that the lasso tool is active. And I'm just going to draw with that lasso active. So I'm going to, and I'm not going to be too perfectionist about it. I'm going to start over here and where I want the vignette to be. So I want to reduce some of this brightness at the top. And then watch, see where my green is? I go right outside so that it's sure to cling to the edges of the image. There we go. And I release, and then we get the marching ants selection. So that's shows the selection where the vignette will be. So now with that selection active, bottom of the layers panel, to the add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line, I'm going to add a brightness or contrast adjustment layer. Left click. So now we have the brightness contrast adjustment layer, and you can see the mask is showing right where I wanted that mask to be and where the brightness or darkness will be applied. Because again, reminder of masks in Photoshop, you use them to either hide or reveal things that your adjustments or enhancements that you're making to an image. So if I want to adjust the brightness or the darkness, it will only happen in the white area, and the black area of the mask will not be affected. Now the other thing is, look at what a harsh line this is. So I definitely don't want to see a harsh line like that for a vignette. So while that mask is still active in the properties panel for the brightness and contrast layer, I want to come to the slider that says feather and pull that more to the right and see. Did you see what it did? Here, let me just show you again. Look at the difference in what it does. So it just softens up how the brightness or the contrast will be applied. Okay, I'll turn that back to that. Let me click on the thumbnail for brightness and contrast. So I want this darker up here to push the attention down to where it's brighter. So in the properties panel with the thumbnail active, I'm going to pull this brightness slider to the left. To the right would be brighter, to the left is darker. And again, I'm going to use my usual thing and just do it a bit and then stop. So that's pretty good. Yeah, see, that's gotten that darker, and I'm not going to do anything to contrast, but I am seeing still kind of a line. So with the mask active, I'm going to feather it some more in the properties panel until I don't see an exact line. I definitely want to see, if you go too far to the right, the effect you're adding will disappear. Yeah, so I think that's good enough. I mean, at least for purposes of demo, to let you know that you can add a vignette. And so again, now I think by adding that, see, it takes your eye from going up here as much and focuses you down into the main area. Now, I'm not going to take the time to do it because this is not going to be a finished image for me, but FYI, if I was working on this to make it more of my own black and white image and more like Herbert List's look, I would probably spend some more time and continue, and again, maybe use another brightness and contrast adjustment layer and try to, first I would use the lasso tool and select parts of this chair where you can see the light is hitting, and then I would use a brightness and contrast, add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer just like we did here, and I would try to brighten that up a little bit so there'd be more contrast. But I think you get the idea of what we're doing with this brighter, and the other elements that we said are sort of in the style or inspired by the style of Herbert List. So let me just come down to the bottom so we can look at the before and the after image. And I think, you know, we've captured some of the essence of his style without choosing the exact same kind of subjects or exactly copying every little detail of the way he would do an image. So that is the end of the how to be inspired by Herbert List style and the types of tools that we can use in Photoshop to achieve it demo. So I am going to pause this video and get set up for the second artist, who is Lillian Bassman. And I will again have some sample images of hers that we can analyze or dissect, and then go into another demo of how to achieve her look. So hold on for a moment. So this will be the second artist that I'm going to do the brief bio, analyze her look, and then go through a demo of the steps to achieve a look that's inspired by hers. So this is Lillian Bassman, and she was an American photographer who lived from 1917 to 2012. She actually started out as a graphic designer and studied graphic design before getting into commercial and editorial photography, fashion and other. She was actually the one who first gave Avedon some work, and they all three, Avedon, Lillian Bassman, and Alexei Brodovich, all worked together at Harper's Bazaar. So you'll see some similar influences of the people who have all worked and studied with or were mentored by Alexei Brodovich, and hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. Lillian was always intrigued by image manipulation. So she started out being very experimental in her initial darkroom work. And then over the years, when the look that she was going for and was delivering, wasn't as popular, or commercial fashion photography in the way that she was doing it wasn't as popular, at one point she just stopped doing photography altogether. And it wasn't until she was 87 years old that she started to learn Photoshop and loved the ability to experiment in Photoshop to reinterpret her original images that she shot with film. So I don't know the formulas she used, I don't know the approach she used, but we're just going to be equally experimental to her to try to get things that are in this sort of interesting style of hers. But I just thought that was great that around close to 90 years old, she was just picking up and teaching herself Photoshop. So again, here's a very small cross-section of samples of her work. Now, what she typically does is she takes any kind of like hardness or literalness of photography out of her photos, as you can see here. They tend to be very soft and hazy. You can see this, look at the kind of the blurry, they have kind of an ethereal kind of a quality to them. I read about the fact that when she was working in the darkroom in the old days, she would even do things like just blow smoke over the enlarger or use gauze to try to get, so as I said, very experimental, that sort of hazy ethereal look that she was going for. I would say that, another term that would fit her work, at least to my perception, is impressionistic. And so when I see some of her works, and there's even another one that's I didn't include in the samples, but it looks a lot like Gertrude Casimir's style, but on steroids. So, and Gertrude Casimir was a very impressionistic style of photographer, so she didn't get quite as graphic design and graphic illustration-y as this. But you can see in all of these images, and this is very typical of her work, very high contrast blacks and whites, very stark. The shadows are pushed to black. See, I mean, there's no, mealy-mouthed around with the black here. And so to use darkroom turns that she would have used in the early days, they're more burned, very darkly burned. And then the highlights are very blown or bleached or dodged. She actually worked with bleach-like chemicals in the darkroom. So you want those very stark looks if you're going for a look similar to hers. She apparently also used to work, and I don't know if, these, well, maybe this one tends to have it. Solarization was a technique that she liked to try to experiment with, and solarization reverses the tones of an image. So light areas appear darker like this, and dark areas appear light. And you probably had heard of Man Ray as somebody who had popularized that solarization technique. So the other thing that we see with hers, and I mention it because I had also mentioned Richard Avedon, who she kind of gave his start in photography and fashion photography, and portrait photography, is there's always a sense of movement, and part of it, I guess, is this blur. But if you think of like Avedon's portraits or Irving Penn's portraits, because they were contemporaries of hers, very static, very still, posed against a static kind of a solid background typically, but Penn tended to do more, rooms or at least setups, but very static, whereas she always has some sense of movement and energy in her images, which I really like. So the way I would classify kind of her art or her photography is abstract simplicity, because look at the simplicity of this. It's a cross between the illustration and the graphic design that she originally studied and photography. She's kind of melded them together. Okay, so we have a good sense of her style. So now let's see, working with a stock image that I have selected, if we can try to emulate or, simulate in a not literal way her look. So let me close out those examples, because again, I don't want to be bound to her exact look. So this is the stock photo I've selected. We have a ballerina in a street here. And again, let me see. Oh, yeah, this is a Pixabay stock photo. And for any of these that I can include the link in the description below the video. So if you want to try to play with the same steps that I until you get your sea legs, then I will try to include them in the description. Okay, so we're going for that Lillian Bassman look that we just did the analysis of the dissection of her style. So again, first step always in the layers panel on the right is duplicate that background layer. So this time I'll do a Control or Command J to jump it up. But if you wanted, you could just click on that background layer, drag it down to the new layer icon, and it would also get you a copy. So this is it's exactly the same thing. It's just duplicated so we don't work with the original. Okay, so now again, first step I want to do besides that duplicating is to convert this color image to a black and white. Now, last time we used the black and white adjustment layer. This time I want to use a gradient map adjustment layer for this conversion, because I think it will give me more control over the balance of the blacks and whites that would suit Lillian Bassman's look better. So bottom of the layers panel, come to the circle with the line through it, which is the adjustment layers, and come down all the way to where it says gradient map, and left click on that. And we've added our gradient map layer to the layers panel, and we have the associated gradient in the properties panel for that layer. And again, yours might be layers at the bottom, properties at the top. It doesn't matter. It's going to work the same way. It's just easier for me to see where I am with the layers with that on top. Okay, so now to work with this, what we want to do is we have this black to white gradient, and that's what we want. We want a black and white image here, and we want to left click on this gradient to open the gradient editor. So left click right in the middle of somewhere in that gradient. And now we've launched this gradient editor. We're going to come all the way down to the bottom and just work on the gradient itself. And as you can see, it's a gradient from black through the shades of gray to white. And we have these control handles that we can click on and slide to position. So we can drag depending on how much black. If you want more black, drag the black to the right. If you want more white, drag the white to the left. And as soon as you start moving them, the little teeny tiny, too small, I don't know why Adobe does that, diamond will appear in the middle that you can adjust the midtones to. So because her highlights are so blown, I'm going to start with the whites. So I'm going to left click on here and just start pulling this to the left and release this. Again, as I said, I always do these in steps so I can see what's happening. And definitely because of Lillian Bassman's look, I'm not going to worry about blowing highlights because that's what she does. I don't want to go too crazy and not be able to see things, but I just want to... All right, I think I'm going to go back. I think that 80 was pretty good. All right, so I'm going to stop there with the whites. Okay, now that I've pushed out more whites, I want to add some more darkness because she had that stark, deep blacks, rich blacks. So now I want to pull the blacks to the right. Oh yeah, there we go. We're getting it darker. Yeah, I like that. I just don't want to lose too much. Okay. And so we're crushing the blacks more here by doing that. And then I think I want to see what will happen if we adjust. So look at how tiny they made this. It's hard for me to click on it. I want to see if we can skew this a little bit more here. Yeah, that's a little blacker. Okay, so I will leave that in the middle there. And again, these are not formulas. Just that's why I say to do it in small spurts, because you really just do it to taste. So once you get yours to a level that you like, and again, you might be inspired by some other artist other than Lillian Bassman. So think about how the artist you're being inspired by, you know, the levels of blacks, midtones, and whites, and then go accordingly. So just click OK up here at the top of the gradient editor once you get your adjustments the way you like. So now, as I said, because Lillian Bassman was influenced and was trained in graphic design and illustration before she got into photography, her stuff does have that blend of illustration and photography. So I want to give this a little bit more stark look to it. So bottom of the layers panel, the tool, the adjustment layer, I'm going to go to the circle with the line. That will give me that kind of dark, really contrasty look is this, where is it? Threshold adjustment layer. Okay, and if you ever just want to go to a posterized black and white, you could just go directly with the threshold, okay? So look what this has done now. So you can see, I mean, it's really very dark and definitely more illustration-y. So we've got the threshold layer and the associated properties panel where you can see this histogram. So I want to try to adjust this so I'm bringing back a little bit more of the photographic look. So I'm pulling this to the left for mine. And I'm watching the image as I go here. All right, let's just see what that does. Now, obviously, this is still too much and more of an illustration. So what I want to do is add a blend mode that will blend this illustration-y look with the layer that came before it. So in the layers panel where you see the word normal, which is the default for blend modes, click on that little down arrow, and then you can just mouse over all of the different ones to see which look you like. For mine, I like soft light. Okay, so I'm going to click on soft light. So I have added a soft light blend mode to that threshold layer. And it still is a little bit too illustration-y, so I can reduce the opacity a bit, dial that back a bit if that's too illustration-y for you. So again, right adjacent to the blend modes up here in the layers panel is opacity. And again, just like I showed you before with the brush tool and flow, you can left click on the word opacity and drag, or click on this little down arrow and drag the slider. They'll work the same either way. Okay, and I kind of like that because we've got this illustration-y look in here, at least, you know, for what I want. You might have different taste, you do what you like. And this is photographic looking in here. So I feel that's giving me kind of an essence of Lillian Bassman there. All right, so let me see here. What do I want to do next? Okay, so she had very soft, blurry background, so I guess we'll we'll attack that next. So I'm going to do my usual thing here and add another stamp layer to create, in essence, a new base layer to work from since we've done this. So you don't need to do this adding the empty layer, but I just like to do it because I see it happening and I know I'm in the right place. So you can actually do that claw move without having to put the empty layer, but I like to put the empty layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, the box with the plus, click on that. We have the empty layer. And again, Shift, Control or Command, Alt, Option, and E all at the same time to create the stamp layer. Okay, now what I wanted to do is before I start doing things like blurs or stuff like that, I want to be sure that I can come back and tweak them and make adjustments if I do the wrong thing. So to give me that flexibility to make changes, I want to convert this to a smart object. So if I right click over in the empty area on this layer, I get this pull down menu and come down to where it says convert to smart object. So again, right click on the empty part of the layer, convert to smart object, and you'll know it's a smart object because it's added this little icon in the corner down here. You can see the other ones don't have that. So now we're okay to do that. So what I want to do here is I want to, because her backgrounds were soft and blurred, but only hint at something there, as opposed to Herbert List, who you could see more of the details, I want to select my subject and then invert that selection so that I'm blurring the background. So the way I'm going to do that is in the toolbar. You can use any of the selection tools, but I'll use the Smart Object Selection tool right there. I just click on it to make it active in black. And then in the options bar at the top, I have my contextual taskbar docked up here. So if you don't know what that is, you can get to it through the window menu. And I have it pinned there so I can just click on things like select subject. If you don't have that, you can just click on select subject in the options bar. And then just wait while Photoshop selects the subject. Okay, and if you can see, okay, there's the marching ants around her that Photoshop has done an auto selection. Now, if you need to alter it at all, so I suggest before you ever do anything, just look it over your selection, that especially if it's an auto selection. I am going to click right below this on the toolbar on the quick selection tool because it looked like it did not capture her hair because it was the same color as the background. So I'm just trying to get to the edges of her, and I won't be too perfectionist about it, but just to let you know to look around the edges if you're making a selection with an auto selection tool, and be sure it's where you want it. Okay, so now that I have that active marching ants selection where I want it, I'm going to invert this. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can, if you have your contextual taskbar open, there's a little icon right here that lets you, it pops up that says invert selection, or you can come to the top of the interface to select the select menu and down to inverse, or if it will work on your computer, you can use this key sequence, which is Shift, Control, or Command, and I. I cannot use that on my computer. Something else on my computer seems to have hijacked that. So if you want, you can just click on the word inverse if the same thing happened to you, and I tend to just click on it over here in my contextual taskbar. And now you can see because I clicked on it, it has inverted the selection. So now, because the marching ants are around the outside, this, whatever is behind her in the background is what has been selected. Okay, so now I want to blur that background while the selection is still active. So I'm going to the top of the interface to filter, coming down to blur, and flying out to Gaussian blur. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, left click. and we get Gaussian blur. And I always have mine clicked to preview so I can see what's happening here. And what you can do is, let's show it. So the further left that we have this slider, the less blur. The further right, more blur. Okay, so you, again, no formulas, just do this to taste, to however much blur you want behind your subject. And as I said, hers was blurrier than Herbert List, so I think I feel okay putting it at something like that level there. Okay, so I've got that the way I like it. I can click OK to accept that. And now look over here in the layers panel on the right. So by adding this smart object before we went into blur, it has put back two sub layers. So one is a mask layer and one says Gaussian blur. So if you get it back and you say, oh no, I did too much blur or I didn't do enough blur, you can double click on the words Gaussian blur and it'll take you right back to whatever your setting was and you can make adjustments to it. I'm not going to, but you could if you wanted to. Now the other thing is with the mask, let me see if I can doctor this mask. So I'm clicking on the mask where she's blocked out because the white is saying, okay, a mask in Photoshop, the white shows or reveals, the black hides. So that means anything that is in white on the mask will be affected by the blur. This is, I'll label this so we know what we're talking about. Background blur, and that was a Gaussian blur. Okay, so the thing is here, it's great that we have this, but I want to get rid of some of this blur that's on the same plane that she's on, because that just, I mean, it doesn't have to be logical if you want to be surreal, but to me, for mine, I like it to make sense that if she's looking photographic, it shouldn't be that blurry adjacent to her. So I've got the white frame around the mask. In the toolbar, I'm going to choose the brush tool. That looks like a paintbrush, and left click on that. I'm going to make sure that I'm painting with black because I want to paint away some of the blur. And let's see if we can use my right bracket key to make this a little bigger. The brush a little bigger. So the brush is the black circle, the green is just the highlighter to show you where I am. Oops, I never adjusted the flow. So check your options bar. I usually like to put things back to my base. I was wondering why I wasn't doing much. There we go. So yeah, so you should be on a soft brush, full opacity, full flow. There we go. That's better. And if you want to, you can alter option on the mask to see what's happening. So if you want to clean it up, you can do that. I'll just angle that a little bit. And it is a toggle, so you could alter option and click again, and then that brings back the image. Okay, so now we've got the background a lot blurrier. We've got the stark black and white like Lillian Bassman's. So now, what else did I say that she did? Unlike Avedon and Penn, she's got a sense of motion or movement to her images. And when you think about, you know, pictures of cars speeding or motorcycles or people running, you think that there's a little bit of a blur line. So we want to add a little bit of that kind of look. So let me add a stamp layer above this. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, box with the plus, Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option and E all at the same time for the stamp layer. Okay, and again, because I'm going to be doing blurs and things that I might want to adjust, I'm going to convert this to a smart object. So right click on that layer, click on Convert to Smart Object from the pop-up menu. Wait till you get the little icon in the lower right. And again, we're going to go to the top of the interface to the filter menu and filter back down to blur. But this time, because we want to give a sense of movement, we're going to use motion blur instead of Gaussian blur. So filter, blur, motion blur. Okay, and when it tells us right there, we got motion blur, we've got the preview so we can see what's happening. And there's this little widget that you can direct the direction of the blur. Now, the way I look at this is she's reaching from like down here to up here. So it's an angle of movement that she's doing. So I want to try to mimic that angle of movement. And you can either just dial in an angle if you're good at visualizing stuff like that, or you can click on the widget and pull it. So I'm trying to see the angle here. I'm trying to get an angle that mimics the angle that she is. Let's see. And you can, when it's highlighted like that, I'm using the down arrow key to see if I can get it to look a little bit more like her. Okay, so that, to me, that's pretty close in terms of getting the sense of motion for her. And then you can control how much blur there is. Okay, so to the left is none, to the right is a lot. So just keep this in mind too if you ever want special effects or create backgrounds or things like that. So let me start from the left and then I'll work my way up to see. So this for me is not enough blur for that movement that I want. That's not bad. Yeah, that's too much. Okay, so somewhere in that 40 range was good. I don't want it too blurry. Yeah, that's all right. I'll leave that there. Okay, so once you get it to where you like it, then you can click OK to go back to send it back to the layers panel. And again, we have the smart object with a mask, and you can double click on the words motion blur if you want to make alterations to the amount of blur that you had. And I'll just click cancel there. So, I mean, we really could even stop here. I mean, to me, and let me just be sure I'm back my neutral tools, yeah. So let me just show you the original versus where we are. So there's the original color. I think this picks up a lot of the Lillian Bassman looks, but the thing is, Lillian Bassman liked to experiment, so let's see, you know, if there's anything else we want to play with here just for sake of playing, but you could absolutely stop here. Anything else I'm going to do would be completely optional in terms of, you know, trying something else. So let me add another stamp layer here. So first of all, I'll add the empty layer with the box with the plus, the add new layer icon, stamp layer, shift, controller command, Alt, Option, and E. Okay, and again, let me try making this a smart object just in case something crazy happens. Got our icon there. So now I'm going to try going in and adding a little bit more blur or haze, because when you add blur or haze, it tends to, not only does it give it kind of that hazy, smoky look that I said that Lillian Bassman liked, but it will tend to blow the whites a little bit more and the brights. So we'll definitely have to temper the blacks a little bit so that it doesn't get too out of hand. But go up to Filter at the top of the interface, come down to Camera Raw Filter, left click on that. We'll go into the Camera Raw interface, and the settings are over here. So I'm going to take down the highlights a little bit and take down the whites a little bit, because I do want to add a little bit of haze, and as I said, it could make it just too blown out. So starting over in this light settings, they used to call these the basic settings, but whatever. Highlights slider, I'll start with that, and I'll take that to the left. So in other words, to the right is more highlights, to the left is less, so I'm going to pull it to the less and temper the highlights a little bit before I go adding any haze, and add a little bit more black so that the haze will be counterbalanced. All right, let me leave that there. Let's do the same thing with the whites, take them down a little bit. And again, with the whites, whiter is to the right, darker, less white is to the left. Let me put it that way. All right, so that's tempered them a little bit. So now let me make the darks a little bit darker too, as I said. So the shadows, again to the left to get darker. Before I add the haze effect. I have to keep just looking at the image. All right, let me stay there. And then the blacks, I'll do the same thing. I'll add a little bit more black. Not nuts, just enough to balance. All right, let me leave that there, and then I could always adjust it if I want to. Okay, so now I think I'll take the exposure down a little bit too, because there's still a lot of brightness. All right, let me leave that there. So now I'm going to take down the texture a little bit. Yeah, that's better, because again, not a lot of hard edges or defined stuff with that Lillian Bassman look. So ditto with the clarity. I'll take that down a little bit too, so there's not as much hard edge definition, even though we've already gotten it pretty soft. Okay. So now I'm at the stage where I want to add a little bit of haze. So now we're on the dehaze slider. So if you pull the slider to the right, the dehaze slider to the right, it will dehaze. If you pull it to the left, it will add some haze. So let me see if we can give this a little bit more of that ethereal, hazy look. That look like some of Lillian Bassman's imagery. All right, I'll leave it around 29. And then when you try to add haze like that, then you have to add a counterbalancing. The way it works is sort of a two-part thing. So you pull the dehaze to the left, and then you have to pull the contrast to the right, and they work together if you're doing a haze effect. And contrast definitely adds more white. So for normal, quote unquote, normal images and color images and things where I want it to look more typically photographic, I actually tend to reduce the contrast by like 2 or 3. Okay, yeah, this is giving me the look I want. Okay. So definitely getting more of that hazy. We still have a little bit of illustration look, but the photographic, the sense of movement and motion, these are all qualities that Lillian Bassman liked to portray. So now the other thing is, again, like I did in the first demo, I think I want to add a little bit of vignette to push the eye in. So coming down to the effects portion of this filter, here we have vignette. If we pull the vignette slider to the right, you can see by looking at the slider, it'll get whiter or brighter. It'll be a white or light vignette. If you pull it to the left, it gets darker. And again, depending on the look you want, you might want it to be a harsh vignette and very obvious vignette, depending on what you're going for. I usually like it to be a subliminal kind of thing. All right, so I think that's pretty good. It's darkened around the edges that way. And just like I said before, I typically like to add just 3 to 4 on the grain, just to give it a little personality, as it were. Okay, so once you get yours, if you want to go to this extra optional step the way well, I then just click OK to send it back to the Photoshop layer. There we go. See, to me, that's giving it a little bit more of that Lillian Bassman look. And then Well, let's play some more, just for the sake of introducing you to some other tools if you haven't worked with them. So let me add another stamp layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon. And again, these are all optional steps. Shift, Control, or Command, Alt, or Option, and E for the stamp layer. I just like to give you tools to play with. It doesn't mean you need to use them necessarily if you don't want to. Okay, so now what I'm going to try to do is try to add an outer glow. I use this effect in, I think, my video on rim lighting, which is one of my recent videos. So if you want to see how to fake rim lighting, you can look at that video too. So I'm going to left click over in this empty area here. Yeah, there we go. It was being ornery. So left click on that. And so I want to bring up this layer styles dialog box. And I want to come down through the layer styles to outer glow. And I'm going to left click on that. And then you get some of the settings that you can use. So I keep, for using the outer glow, I keep my blend mode on linear dodge. And if you want, you can click that little down arrow and experiment with other things. I keep the opacity to around 60%. And for this particular image, so you can alter the colors if you want, I tend to like it just off-white in the sense of not a creamy white, but it's sort of a gray white since we're working with the halftone images here. So I'm leaving it on that pale gray. If you click on that, you get the color picker, and you can pick any color you want along the color picker. So I will cancel that. And then for me, I keep the technique on softer. So I think that's the only other thing you'd need to know about. And click OK. All right, and so that's added just a little bit more of an outer glow to her. Now, the one other thing that I would tend to do for my own images and look at my images is some cleanup before I finish up. So if I want to do any cleaning, in other words, I would use the remove tool typically to get rid of things. That's what I call cleaning. I'd bottom of the layers panel, add a new empty layer. That's the box with the plus. There we go. And I'll just call this clean. Okay, and then in the toolbar, I'll come to the remove tool, which looks like a little band-aid with magical sparkles. Left click on that to make it active. And what I do when I clean is I look for what are distractions from my subject in the scene. And there's a lot of these things that can pull attention. So I'm going to use my left bracket key to make that brush, which is the white circle inside my highlighter, a little smaller, and I will just brush with the overlay over things that I find to be distracting that I don't want in the background. I think this bright light here draws too much attention away from her. I'll just do a quick little brush there and see if it, yeah, see, that's fine. That lessened it. I honestly don't, this is kind of bright too. Her eye is coming over here, but I think this draws the eye, so let's see it. Pray for me that this works. Okay, there we go. So I just circle around the outside and let it fill. Yeah, so I feel okay with that now. So that's my, there's a little bit of a white over here. So that's my clean layer to just get rid of those minor distractions. So again, we have gone from the original color stock image from Pixabay of this ballerina to a black and white image that I hope has an essence that it's been inspired by Lillian Bassman's photographic style based on the sample images that we looked at. So that is the end of the second artist and demo. And again, I will pause to set up for the third and final artist analysis and demo. And again, you can always pause these videos and come back, and that's why I put the links to the start times for each of the discussion topics in the description. So if this gets to be too long for one sitting, or you want to revisit different things to remember the steps, you can come back whenever you like. So hold on for a moment. So now this will be the third and final artist and image analysis and demo for this video. And this final artist is Pentti Sammallahti, and he is a contemporary Finnish photographer. So he's born in 1950, still alive, still practicing, and he does black and white fine art photography. Actually, I was interested to hear his grandmother was a photographer in the early 1900s, so I guess it just runs in his genes. She was Swedish. He photographs with film, and from what I had read, he uses medium format cameras of various ilks, and then he very much likes to experiment and work in the darkroom to produce his own work. So he's not a Photoshop person, and because I think his darkroom is in a very tight little basement in his home or something, he makes small format prints typically. The interviews that I have seen with him, he has listed his influences, so the people he gets inspired by, as Josef Kudelka, Andre Cortez, Paul Strand, so people of those nature. And if you look at their work, you'll see their influences in his too. And then interestingly, because you don't have to just be influenced by other photographers, I know I'm not. I like various painters that influence my work too. He was influenced by Rembrandt, and specifically Rembrandt's early etchings. So he does travel extensively. He does travel to very cold, desolate places very often. So it's reflected in the subject matter in his images. And again, I also found it interesting as a little tidbit of cocktail party information that Henri Cartier-Bresson collected his work. So he is maybe not a name brand photographer, but he certainly is name brand quality. So these are just a very few examples of Pentti's work. And so again, let's start with the dissection or the analysis of his style and the characteristics of his photography. And then we can try to either replicate or just be inspired by, some of what he does in some steps that we could follow in a demo with regard to Photoshop tools to achieve his kind of look. So definitely there is a lot of nature in his images. He tends to have a lot with birds and dogs. There's a dog back here, and there's a little bird over here. This is a little white bunny rabbit here. But I would say that he also has a lot of man and nature interactions in terms of the types of things that he photographs. And, again, he's somebody who I think has a surrealistic approach or a fantastical, kind of approach to things too. Certainly a humorous kind of approach in the way he sees the world and interactions of things too. But I think he's somebody who treats his animals in an, anthropomorphic kind of way, just like Audubon used to. So that means that he tends to like to give human qualities or characteristics to the animals in his images. I personally would describe his images as very quiet or still or silent. There's also typically a sense of isolation. It's not a lot of crowded city scenes or, a lot going on in the images. So there's also a sense of austerity. They're alone and it's them versus nature. It's not bustling and lively in terms of what you're seeing in the subject matter in his photos. There aren't a lot of subjects to look at. It's very distilled, I guess, and simple is the best way to say it. To me, and you may or may not see it, I think his pictures have kind of a very poetic or introspective kind of look to them in terms of the visual stories that they give off. Yet there is, because of the quality of how he uses black and white, a lot of intensity and opposites and these bright lights or bright whites and darks, so if you have a bright white, well, then it's starkly against a dark black. If you have a bright white, there's the stark black. But he also then in some series tends to use a lot of these middle grays, subtle grays. So, you know, he's kind of got different looks, but there's still distinctive things going on. It's always, though, typically if he's in a snowy environment, there's a lot of white, and then the figures he wants you to notice are dark. And if he's in a warm or rainy or whatever environment, then, you know, you tend to have the white against the black. Now, and this just totally cracked me up because maybe I'm dating myself here, but this looked like a Beatles cover or something to me, so I found that pretty amusing. Okay, so his look is definitely fine art oriented, and as I said, there is a sense of humor to it, and what, you know, pay attention if you want to look like his as to where you're putting things in the scene, how things are interacting with each other, as well as the starkness of the darkness and the brightness. So that's Pentti Sammallahti, and I hope I'm not butchering his name, the Finnish photographer. So let me close the examples of his work and see if we can then work with this stock image. And I'm trying to think, did I put where this was from? This might be another Pixabay, but I forget. Pixabay is the stock service. Okay. Now, I will say that for this image, and if I have the link to it, I will include it in the description. So if you want to try to work through these steps on this same image to start with, you can. But again, you are not limited to working with these kind of images or this kind of look. I am very drawn to low-key images and low-key photography, meaning dark tones. So if you're somebody who likes very high-key and bright, you can work with a lot of the same tools and just pull your sliders or deal with the tools in the opposite way than I am and make the things bright. You're not limited to saying, oh, her taste isn't mine, so this won't help me. Okay, now I doctored, the actual stock photo was just this little dude right here, but I added this just because, again, I wanted to try to get that Pentti sort of sense of humor, and so he's got this aspirational little look on his face looking at the bigger scooter, and I like the fact that they were both yellow scooters. I like the mimicking of this little alien thing on his little scooter with his hat, and I like the fact that this bigger scooter had the same kind of little things going on here with the rearview mirrors. So I'm just trying to pick up on a little of the flavor without having it be birds and dogs and literal to Pentti Sammallahti in terms of what I'm trying to achieve in a picture here. Okay, so that's my starting image, and you can use any starting image you like, but just a fair warning that the stock image I'll put a link to will not have this in it. All right, so again, let's start by duplicating our background layer. You can left click on the background in the layers panel, drag it to the add new layer icon, which is the box with the plus to get the copy, or control or command and J to jump that up. So now again, first step beyond that is to convert the color image to a black and white. And I've used two different tools in Photoshop so far for the first two demos. So now this one I'll try a third one, and this time I'll use the channel mixer adjustment layer. So bottom of the layers panel to the add adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line, and let me see if I can find channel mixer is right here. Left click, and we get our channel mixer layer. And you can see that unlike the others, this has not automatically converted the image to a black and white. So we look at the properties panel, and again, yours might be on just reversed in terms of where it's located, but it works all the same way. Look at the properties panel for that channel, active channel mixer layer, and you can click on the box that says monochrome. Okay, so now we've converted this to a black and white. And you can either, again, you know, sort of like I showed you before with the gradient, with the black and white adjustment layer, sorry, you can adjust sliders manually if you want to, or you can try working with the presets, just slide across to the down arrow, and you can see all the different options. So here's a black and white infrared. And again, so I'm going for that Pentti Sammallahti look. I want the two subjects in the foreground to be very bright and white, and I want them against a dark background to try to emulate or be inspired by that Pentti look. So this is not doing it for me because this is making things darker here. Let's try the blue filter. That's better. Yeah, and you can see if you just click through for your own, to see what is going to help you achieve what you want. I think for mine and the direction I'm going to go with this blue filter. It's the black and white with the blue filter preset just to start. Okay. So again, either make your primary subjects or subject black or very bright white, and then make the background the inverse of that. So I am going to go for bright for both of these subjects, as I said. So first thing I'm going to do is select this scooter over here to try to make this brighter. So I am going to use my Smart Object tool. So you can use any of the selection tools, but I like to just come down and it's right there, the Smart Object selection tool. And I have that tool set in my options bar for the mode being the lasso. So I don't have it on rectangle, I have it on lasso. And that way I can just loosely draw around the subject and have it select. So I'm just going to left click because I'm using a mouse and just loosely, you don't have to draw right along the edge of your object or subject. Hopefully Photoshop will know enough when it makes the auto selection to jump in and cling to the edges of your subject. I just sort of follow it a little bit. Okay, so you can see Photoshop has processed and it has made a selection along the edges of the scooter, and I'm going to call it good for purposes of demo. I'm not going to get too perfectionist about that. So now with that selection and those marching ants, that's what they call the dashed little moving things, are marching ants, active, I'm going to put this back to my neutral tool, go to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new adjustment layer icon, the circle with the line, and I want to make this brighter, so I'm going to use an exposure adjustment layer for this because I want to make it quite bright. And you'll notice again, because I did that with the selection active, it has on the layer mask for that exposure layer selected only that scooter. So anything I do darker or brighter, it's only going to affect what's white on the mask, in this case this scooter. Okay, so I want to make mine brighter, so I'm going to come in the properties panel on the exposure slider. I'm going to go to the right because I want this brighter. And again, I just drag a little bit at a time and I watch what's happening. This is nothing formulaic till I see to my taste if it's where I want it. That's not bad, but it's a little blown. If I was doing Lillian Bassman, I wouldn't mind it so blown. I'm just watching things, I'm pointing at the screen like you can see my finger. I'm watching things like in here to make sure it's not too blown. Okay, and then let's see if I can add back a little bit of darkness because the black's got a little lifted here and a little hazy. So let's see. If I can try to, oh, here we go. There we go, that's better. And then I just go back and forth. It's definitely experiment to taste. Yeah, all right, so I feel good about that because let's see here. Yeah, so we've made this a lot brighter and whiter, and the blacks are black, but we've retained some of the tread detail. So I'm going to stop there. Maybe just clicking on the mask here so the white frame is around to make it active in the properties panel again for that same exposure layer. I might feather this just a very tiny little bit, but I don't want hazes around it, so I'm not going to go too crazy with that. Okay, so now same thing. We want to make this little guy over here, the toddler, a little bit whiter and brighter too, so that both of these things will pop if we make the background darker. So again, same kind of thing with the object selection tool, active, set to lasso. I'm just going to loosely trace around him so that we can get an auto selection from Photoshop. And then wait while Photoshop thinks. Okay, so we've got a selection, and I can see it's missing some things, like this petal was missed and this petal in here was missed. So again, I'll click on the quick selection tool, which looks like a brush with that little loop there. And maybe if I make this bigger, I can add to the selection. And I'm not going to worry if it's not perfect for demo, but I do want to get his little foot in there. And I'm just, when I'm adding to the selection, if you look inside the tool there, which is the white, you can see a plus. So if the plus is showing, I'm adding to the selection. If I press the Alter option, that changes to a minus, so you can take away from the selection. Let me add to that. Okay, and I'm going to say this is good, so I will leave that like that so you don't have to watch me fooling around with the selections. Okay, so again, with that selection and those marching ants active, bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, the circle with the line. Again, I want to brighten them up, so I'm going to use, and for things like this, I tend to like exposure. If I do a hint of brightness at the end, then I would use brightness and contrast, but I'm going to use exposure for this because I'm really wanting to adjust that exposure. And again, you can see on the mask, he is the only thing that's selected, so any exposure adjustments I make on this layer, they're only going to affect him. Okay, so again, I want to make him just a little bit brighter than he is, but I don't want to blow him out. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so that's pretty good. So we got him pretty white. Let's see. I'm adjusting the gamma, and then I'll see the offset usually makes it deeper, richer, or lifts it, makes it a little bit hazier or softer. So let's just play with this and see what happens. Okay, yeah, so that's good because we've got the deep black eyes for contrast here. His face lightened up a little bit. He definitely lightened up a little bit, and again, I might just feather that mask a very little bit with the white frame around it to be sure the mask is active and being affected. And let's just turn that eye. Yeah, so we brightened him up. If you want, you could even, with that lasso tool or the quick selection tool, just select his little face and make it a little brighter if you want to. But since the hat is shiny, I don't want to be too crazy about this. So I think he's bright enough, and this scooter that he's so envious of is bright enough that they'll provide good contrast to a dark background. Okay, so now that we've got the foreground elements taken care of, or the main subjects, now let's deal with the background and making that contrasty dark to stand out. So I'm going to create a stamp layer in order to create kind of a new base layer to work from. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, that's box with the plus, we get the empty layer. We're going to press Shift, Control or Command, Alt, Option, and E all at the same time to create the stamp layer, which, as I've said before, is essentially a merge of everything that's come before it. It's like a composite of everything without collapsing it. Okay, so now while we have the object selection tool active, which is this one right here, I'm going to say to select the subjects, which are these two items right here, and now that they're bright, hopefully Photoshop will be able to find them. And then I want to invert them because we will now want to work with the background. So again, if you do not have your contextual taskbar right here from the Windows menu visible to click on Select Subject, then you can click on Select Subject right here from your options bar. I like to use it over here. And just wait while Photoshop does its thing. And because this was bright, it's done a pretty good job. I think, again, it missed his little petal over here. Other than that, I'm not going to worry about it too much. Okay, so we have those two subjects active. So now we want to invert the selection so that we're getting everything but them. So again, if you have your contextual toolbar visible, you can click on this little icon that looks like it's going from black to white, and that's the inverse selection. Or you can come to the select menu at the top of the interface and come down to where it says inverse, or if it works for your system, it doesn't work for mine, you can press the keys Shift, Control or Command, and I to inverse. And I'll just click on this button here, and Photoshop has already inverted it because now you can see that the marching ants are around the outside and these two things are not being affected. So now on this stamp layer with this selection active, I want to add a layer mask that represents that background. So bottom of the layers panel, come to this box with the circle in it, and that's the add layer mask. Click on that and you can see it has added the layer mask to that active layer. And what it has done is it said, okay, now what is actionable is the white areas, so that's all the background, and nothing will affect whatever's in black, which are these two subjects that we've already taken care of and brightened. Okay, so now what we want to do is duplicate, because I want to make two different masks out of this initial mask. So rather than starting and going through the whole thing each time, let's just duplicate this. So left click on the thumbnail, drag it to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, that box with the plus, and there we've got an exact copy. So let's just turn off the eyeball on that one and work on this first original copy here first. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to be able to work with what I'll call the sky. So it's really all this foliage in the background, but let's just divide this where the dividing line is into sky and ground, just to keep it simple. So I want to make what I'm calling the sky darker and blacker to look like what Pentti Sammallahti would do. Okay, so what I want to do is be sure I'm working on the mask on this initial layer, so the white frame has to be around the mask. I want to grab my rectangular marquee tool, what looks like a little dashed rectangle, from the toolbar. Left click on that to make it active. And now I'm going to pull a rectangular marquee across the ground. So I'll start outside the image and I'll just pull across. My left mouse button is depressed and I'm pulling, and then I will pull all the way down till I've covered this whole ground area, and then release my mouse to get this rectangular selection in this area. And again, you want to be sure you're doing this with your mask on your active layer. Okay, you don't want to be putting anything on top of the thumbnail because it'll show up on the image. So now we want to fill this rectangular area with black. So in other words, if we want to make this area darker, we don't want this area affected. And I've already said on masks, anything that's black will be hidden and will not be affected. So with that active, we'll press Shift and backspace, and you get this fill dialog box. Now you can either choose, in this case, the foreground color, because that's black, or I just like to keep it simple and straightforward and use black. So, and I keep this normal at 100% once you get what you want, and you might be using white depending on what you're doing if you want to show. So just keep it in mind. To hide something, use black. Click OK, and look, it has modified, because there's what was the exact same mask. Now it has put that rectangular marquee down here in this area. So now all we can affect is the sky with whatever we're doing, okay? To get rid of the marching ants, Control or Command and D as in David. And so now we have that mask. So now what I want to do is be able to darken this. So again, we're going to use an exposure layer to do that. So bottom of the layers panel, come down to the Add New Adjustment Layer icon, that circle with the line. Come to choose the Exposure Adjustment Layer, and it will put it right above your active layer. See, the eyeball's off on that, so it's not active. And all we want to do is just, I don't even need to copy it. We can just move this mask to this exposure layer. So left click on the mask that has the rectangle and just keeping your mouse button depressed, drag it up to that mask, release, and it'll say replace layer mask, and you say yes. And then I can just turn this off there because we don't need that. That just served its purpose. So now on this exposure layer that's active with this mask that's dark at the bottom and white at the top, we can darken what I'm calling the sky, okay? So I want to take this to the left on the Properties panel for that exposure layer to make it darker, because to the right would be brighter. That's actually pretty good. Let me leave it there till I see if I want to adjust it any. And maybe I can even make it a richer black. Let's see. That's too much. We're losing the sense of the foliage. Because he definitely, it's interactions of things and people and objects and animals in nature. So I like to get the sense that there's trees back there. Okay, so I'm going to leave mine there. And again, can feather the mask if you like with the white frame around there in the Properties panel. You can just do a very subtle. Now, the thing I'm noticing here is, and I need to feather it more. So because I used the rectangular marquee to designate this area down here, the ground area, what I've ended up with is a very distinct line from the rectangle, and that doesn't look very natural in the image. So with that mask active and the white frame around it, I want to use the feather slider until I see this distinct line going away and it looks just like how it looked before in terms of the trees and the ground blending together. And I'll just pull it a bit at a time and release until I don't see that harsh line. There we go. That's better. See? So you can see how we've made it look like Pentti's kind of style with that very dark. And I like that there's some brightness here with the wall or the trees, whatever, so that we don't totally lose the rear view mirrors on that. Okay, so now can come up to this next layer here, make that active, turn the eye back on, make sure that it's active layer with the blue highlight on it, and we want to basically do the inverse. So this time with the mask active and the white frame around it, we want to use the rectangular marquee tool from the toolbar again, and this time we want to be able to darken the ground. So I'm going to start out here again at that dividing line with the marquee, and I'm going to click and then just start pulling out my left mouse button depressed, and then pulling up till we have this completely framed, so we have the quote-unquote sky completely encased by this rectangle. And again, because we have our little figures protected, they're already there. They won't get impacted by what we're doing here. Okay, so with this rectangle pulled out, we want to fill with black. So we do the inverse of this. So up at the top, it becomes black. So Shift and Backspace. Get the fill dialog box. Want to fill with black, or you can fill with the foreground color. Okay, and there, you can see it's the reverse. And again, I'm going to do a Control or Command and D as in David to get rid of the marching ants. All right, and this time I'm not going to use an exposure layer. So this one is the ground mask. I suppose it was exposure, but this is the ground that we're working with here now. It was fine to use exposure because I wanted to go to a really, really rich, deep black here to look like Pentti's kind of look. But because we have these sort of middle grays here and I don't want to go to full black, I'm going to try using a curves adjustment layer here because I think it will let me be able to give more subtle gradations. So bottom of the layers panel, to the add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line, left click, and come down to curves and left click on that, and we get our curves layer in the layers panel, and the associated properties shows you the curve that we can adjust here. Now I keep my targeted adjustment tool always set to on so I can use it, and what that lets me do is it's almost like it becomes a little eyedropper once you get out in the image. So look at inside my green highlighter, you see that little eyedropper? So I can select from somewhere in this area to get the tone that I want to adjust. So let me say this is sort of an average gray for this area. I can click once there, and if you look over in the right hand properties panel at the bottom, you'll see that has put a little square where that is. So I can start trying to make that ground. And again, because, oops, I didn't do it. First, we have to move my mask up. See, you have to think, too many moving parts. So we created this ground mask here. So left click on that, drag it up to that curves layer, replace, yes, and then I can turn off this. So I needed to get my mask. There we go. I thought it looked a little bit weird. So yeah, so be sure you get your mask up there so you're only affecting the white part, in other words, the ground area, and not the subjects because they're protected with the black. Okay, so now we go back to our curve, and as I said, you'd use this targeted selection tool and it still would have worked the same way. It's just it was an extra step this way. And I'm gonna, again, I don't want this to be as dark as the background, but I definitely want them to pop. I want to see all these details in the ground. So I think for me, that looks pretty good. Now, the thing, again, to keep in mind, because we used that rectangular marquee, we've got that harsh line. So clicking on the mask to make it active with the white frame around it, go to the associated properties panel and the feather slider, and just gradually pull up the feather slider until those two, the demarcation between the ground and this, what I'm calling the sky, disappears and it gets soft. There you go. So for me, it was about there, and it's not, again, it's not a formula, you just have to eyeball it. Okay, so I think, I mean, seriously, I think we've gotten that Pentti Sammallahti kind of look. We've got those deep, rich kind of blacks. I did something wacky here. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. Let's see if we can go back. There. So let me move this up. I pressed the Alt instead of the Control here. All right, so let me... something wacky happened with Photoshop. Well, ignore that. Something kind of kooky happened here with the Photoshop, but it would not be doing all of these boxes in here. I think something just had a little brain aneurysm in Photoshop for a moment here. But I wanted to show you the before and after. And again, just ignore these boxes that popped up because honestly, I don't know where they came from. But we did get that Pentti sort of a look where it was before I did that flip, where we have the very bright subjects. And again, this was all very bright, and I don't want to take it back to ground zero again. So you know that these were bright, this was dark, and that we have the two foreground subjects. We have that sense of humor of something going on. We have repeating sort of shapes, very simple, not a lot going on. So I think we've kind of captured his look, except for what went crazy here at the end. The only other thing I can think to suggest, if you do want to get more of his kind of a look, is after you do this kind of step here, if you optionally want to come to the bottom of the layers panel, come back to the adjustment layers and add a brightness and contrast. And this is just, I just wanted to show you, this is an instance where I would use brightness and contrast versus exposure. And if I wanted to just give it a hint more brightness without make it the light things pop against the black, then I might use the brightness and adjust the brightness slider. And as I said, contrast does tend to brighten, so I might add a little bit of contrast, but I wouldn't go too nuts on the contrast for my look that I want. Yeah, so that's adding just a little bit more pop. It's subtle, but look, you can see the extra pop it gives it. I apologize for what happened there, but anyway, I don't want to have you watch me go back through all those steps. We were okay until the final show and tell there. So that is the end of the final third demo showing getting a style like Pentti Sammallahti. So in summary for the video, I believe it's okay to quote unquote steal like an artist. In other words, be inspired by the artists that you admire, and it doesn't have to be the same three that I picked, in order to create your own black and white fine art photo style. So definitely don't feel limited to the artists I profiled, even if you want to start with them as something just to get familiar with the tools. But the process in general, as we saw, is select artists whose work you admire, analyze or dissect what they are doing technically in their images. I mean, it's straight looking and seeing how have they composed it, how are they using tones, are the figures static or moving, things like that. So very technically analyzing what's in the image, and then you move to the Photoshop tools that will help you emulate the essence of your favorite artist's looks without literally copying them. Okay, so in this video, I presented that kind of process for the styles of black and white photographers Herbert List, Lillian Bassman, and Pentti Sammallahti, and I showed a variety. I showed 3 different black and white conversion methods, and again, I'll try to include a link in the description to my other video that's earlier on how to do black and white conversions if you want to see more details. And then I also showed other tools that could be used to add blur, softness, contrast, darkness, lightness, or abstract qualities for low-key, in other words, darker, fine art looks. And I'm going to take a sip before I finish up here. Okay, water is good. So you can either practice with any stock images, or as I said, I'll try to link to some in the description that you could practice with if you want to use those, or else just process your own images based on your own favorite photographer's works. But I think the main thing and that all these artists had, and that I enjoy too, is just experimenting and trying different looks until you find a style that's all your own. So take care and enjoy.